All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Deanna Palm, President of the Hillsborough Chamber. Thank you for joining us today for our third annual Green Business Symposium. Normally, we would be enjoying the smell of fresh brewed coffee, bacon, and eggs. However, I hope you had a great breakfast this morning and that you have a good cup of coffee to sip on. I want to take a moment to recognize and thank Jennifer Stefanik, Green Business Coordinator for Washington County's Solid Waste and Recycling, and her entire team for putting this program together for us this morning. They have done a tremendous job of organizing the presentations this morning and making sure we have a great interactive program for you to learn from and participate in. So thanks so much. Virtual applause to all. I also want to thank all of our sponsors that were willing to pivot with us to a virtual program. While we always enjoy seeing you in person, when that's not possible, we appreciate your continued support as we bring this important program information to you today. A couple of program notes before we get started. Today's event will have a Spanish interpreter room. If you would like to join the Spanish interpretation room, please find the interpretation link at the bottom right of the Zoom screen and click on the Spanish option. Also, all attendees will have their microphones muted today. If you have questions or comments during the event, please use the chat function to interact with the presenters. Now it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce our title sponsor, the Port of Portland. We appreciate the long-standing partnership we have enjoyed with the Port and the many ways that they engage with the Hillsborough Chamber. Representing the Port of Portland today is Erin Anderson, Environmental Specialist 2, working in waste management and compliance. Erin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us virtually. I wish I could meet you all, but this will have to suffice. So as you heard, my name is Erin, and I'm an environmental specialist with the Port of Portland. I work in all things waste related, and the Port is very honored to sponsor this event. For any that are not familiar with the Port, we own and operate 3 airports: Portland International Airport, Troutdale, and Hillsborough, as well as a number of marine terminals on both the Columbia and Willamette River. The Port is also a landowner for a number of industrial parks, natural areas, and wetland mitigation sites. So we kind of have our hands in everything. All of our work is guided by our mission of moving people and goods to enable and deliver shared prosperity in the region. And environmental leadership is one of our guiding principles. We've made great strides in redeveloping natural sites to enhance local plants and pollinator species, reducing diesel emissions to improve local air quality, controlling stormwater pollutants and discharges. In my area of expertise, reducing waste. We do this through providing outreach and education for our tenants and partners, especially working with our restaurants to create a food donation program, redirecting edible food to our community, and preventing waste from food packaging by using reusable dishes in one of our food courts. We also work with a lot of our maintenance facilities and construction projects to make sure that debris coming off of their activities are recycled and repurposed or reused as much as possible. Our success is dependent on the partnerships we create with regional government agencies, as well as our tenants and our community, which is why I'm excited for this event. As I'm sure you all are experiencing with COVID, it's kind of left us all disconnected, and I think this is a great opportunity to connect and share success and ideas. Now I'd like to talk about the Green Business Leaders Program from Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling Division. The Green Business Leaders team offers free technical assistance to help your business recycle more, reduce waste, save money, and can coach your business in becoming a certified green business leader. Next up, our Green Business Coordinator, Jennifer Stefanik, and Green Business Advisor, Kate Cesare, to present on the recyclability of materials, considerations for business expenditures, operations, waste generation, and waste reduction. There will be interactive polls throughout the presentation focusing on materials management, sustainability, and other knowledge-based questions. Later in the presentation, Kate and Jennifer will send attendees into breakout groups to prompt further discussions around these topics. Thank you all for being here, and I'll pass it along.
Great. Thanks, Erin. Thank you for being here at Port of Portland, and Erin, it's great to see you. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm glad you all could be here for the Hillsborough Chamber Green Business Symposium, 3rd annual, first virtual. I'm Jennifer, as Deanna had noted early on. Excuse me. I'm the Green Business Coordinator for Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling Division. My colleague, Kate DeCesare, Green Business Advisor on my team, will be sharing more info about the Green Business Leaders Program later, so stay tuned for that. On the agenda today, we are going to talk about materials consumption, recycling and contamination, specific characteristics or attributes of materials, and then we'll just wrap up the discussion talking about post-consumer recycled content, so PCR. Some of this info that I'll be sharing today comes from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. We've been able to really use some of their information to help inform our businesses. And so we've adapted parts of this presentation today to share with you, just sort of as a precursor to some of the content that the DEQ will be presenting a little bit later this morning. So we have a fair amount to cover too, so we won't be doing a Q&A after every single session, including mine. We will be doing one right after the DEQ. But if you have questions, starting any moment now, please feel free to put those into the chat. And we have some solid waste and recycling staff behind the scenes who will be answering questions as we go. Okay, so just a little housekeeping today. Please do keep your microphones muted. And again, feel free to put those questions into the chat box. They will be monitored and answered as we go. Feel free to have your camera on or off, whichever you'd like. And as a reminder though, to keep an eye on that chat box, because during these presentations, we will be putting some links to information and resources that pertain to the presentation as we go. So we just want to make sure that we're getting you as much info on this information that we're sharing today. And one more note, as Deanna mentioned, if you would like to hear this presentation in Spanish, please click the interpretation link at the bottom right, where this green, where the green arrow is, And you'll notice a Spanish link that will pop up, and you can click on that and jump into the Spanish interpretation room. And you're welcome to go back and forth between the rooms. So, all right, let's get started. Make sure we're on time here. Yep, we're doing good. Okay, so we all use materials every day. All the stuff that we need to live our lives and get things done. Materials are the items that flow through commerce that we manufacture and sell, and that we fill our stores, our businesses, and our homes with, and our landfills. And while these materials serve an important part of our everyday lives, our current consumption is really just unsustainable. In the past 50 years, humans have consumed more resources than in all of our previous history. Our economy is very much tied to global markets for these materials, while competition and prices increase. The materials we're using are also changing. According to the EPA, in 1900, 41% of the materials we used in the US were renewable. By 1995, only 6% were considered renewable. That dependence means that our economy is fundamentally not sustainable. And with this dependence comes risk, not only to our economy, but to our environment as well. The scale of materials dependence, production, and transport has serious environmental effects that include greenhouse gas production, climate change, impacts of toxic chemicals, acidification, loss of soil fertility, nutrient imbalances in oceans and lakes, resource depletion, and the decline of biodiversity and natural capital, which is the basis not only for our economy, but for life itself. So since we've started this presentation off on a positive note, things will get better here as we talk further through this, but we will be having some interaction with you for this presentation. So my colleague, Kate, has created some poll questions for the audience. And so she will go ahead and launch our first poll. So go ahead and take it away, Kate.
Thanks, Jen. You guys all should have seen a poll question pop up on your screen, and you can answer it just directly in that pop-up. The question is, what is the United States' largest source of greenhouse gas emissions? So we'll just leave this open for about 20 seconds here. All right, we're seeing a lot of the votes come in. All right, thanks everybody for participating. Now I'm going to start sharing some results. And the top choice was materials upstream, which includes extraction, manufacturing, and transportation of goods. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jen.
All right, thanks, Kate. So, all right, getting back into this, we're going to touch on that poll. The materials we use every day have big impacts on our environment. From a 2006 US system-based greenhouse gas emissions inventory, materials are responsible for 42% of all US emissions. So the yellow and red parts of this pie chart you see. Upstream of the consumer in production, manufacturing, and transportation accounts for 40% of material impact. Downstream, primarily landfills and wastewater, only accounts for 2%. What that means is how materials are produced, used, and transported is extremely important and adds to the environmental impact of any given consumer good. So recycling is perhaps the best understood and most widely promoted means of reducing the environmental impacts of the materials we use. Recycling is widely understood to be a better way of managing wastes and of keeping waste out of landfills. But if that's all recycling is, then its potential is limited. Indeed, look at how small landfill emissions are, noted by this 2% slice of the pie. Fortunately, recycling's benefits aren't limited to just landfill avoidance. In fact, most of the benefits of recycling are elsewhere. Recycling, when done right, is beneficial, but we also need to acknowledge the limitations of recycling. Well, we'll talk about the benefits. Recycling in Oregon in 2016 saved approximately 27 trillion BTUs of energy, so approximately 2.8% of total statewide use, equivalent to 220 million gallons of gasoline. And recovery in Oregon in 2016 reduced greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 2.9 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent, approximately 4.7% of total statewide emissions, equivalent to 690,000 average passenger cars. Most benefits are upstream, not downstream. Now, to realize those upstream benefits, the system of recycling, collection, and sorting needs to be able to provide industrial end users with good materials they can use in lieu of virgin feedstocks. For example, Epson can't make printer cartridges out of plastic that has wood chips in it, contaminated, with contaminants such as wood chips. And similarly, the industrial producers of steel, paper, plastic, aluminum, and glass cannot produce usable materials for commerce when we put materials in our recycling containers that don't belong there. How much of a problem is this? One of the downsides to recycling is contamination. When too many people throw the wrong materials in with the accepted materials collected, whether wishfully or unintentionally. The MRFs, materials recovery facilities, that sort mixed recyclables have to keep pace with households and businesses that don't recycle right and place contaminants in their bins and dumpsters. Wishful recycling and contamination harms the system, causes problems at these facilities, the MRFs, the materials recovery facilities, which is what you see here in this image. For the facilities, for the workers, and can cause huge problems for product manufacturers, as we'll see next. Here's an example of contamination down the Columbia River, just down the Columbia River from Portland, at the NORPAC paper mill, which processes about 500 tons of scrap paper a day and produces about 750,000 tons of paper annually. Currently, this facility recycles scrap paper fiber, which gets turned into 100% recycled packaging grade papers, including paper bags and liner board for boxes. But over the course of many years, for every 100 tons of paper produced, the mill had more than 20 tons of garbage or contamination coming out of its pulper at the time, and currently sends about 20 truckloads of rejected and contaminated materials to the dump every day. The cost of managing this contamination is high. And at one point, NORPAC had to switch back to using virgin feedstocks. So recycling failed at NORPAC at the time because of contamination, which can be a common problem in many processing facilities around the Pacific Northwest. More recently, domestic markets have increased the influx of recycled paper, and NORPAC may spend millions on capital upgrades if they can get contamination levels down. Because in the long run, making paper products from recycled feedstocks can save energy, money, and really lower environmental impacts. So the graph we see here shows pulper rejects as a percentage of production. So meaning the amount of produced pulp was rejected over time as a percentage of production. And this example shows higher levels of contamination year after year. Okay, so now we have another poll. So Kate, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Jen. So you see 4 items up on your screen, and for each of these materials, we're going to decide if this is recyclable curbside, which is the mixed recycling bins that are picked up by your hauler. So I'm launching the poll now, and the materials are going from left to right: plastic clamshells, plastic film like plastic bags, paper cups and plates, and finally, hand sanitizer bottles and wipe containers. So we'll give you just a few seconds to put in your answers. All right, so it looks like most folks have responded here. So now we'll take a look at some results. All right, starting with the clamshells. Most of you got it right, with 85% of people saying no, they are not recyclable curbside. So keep in mind that in Oregon, our plastics are based on shape. And so you're going to want to recycle bottles, jars, and kind of yogurt tub containers. But plastic clamshells are not recyclable curbside. And now moving on to plastic film, 90% asked correctly, and they said it is not recyclable curbside. So you can drop off plastic bags at a lot of grocery stores, and you can also use our recycleware tool, which Heather, my colleague, shared a link to in the chat to find more locations. And then moving on to paper cups and plates, they're not recyclable curbside. A lot of these do contain some sort of plastic. And then finally, hand sanitizer bottles and wipes containers. Then we can see that they are recyclable curbside, but you do want to take off the bottle cups. And with that, turn it back over to Jen.
Great, thanks, Kate. Just a note to Kate, your microphone's clipping out just a little bit. All right. All right. Okay, now for the waste hierarchy and sort of the butt in recycling. You know, as we like to look at this in terms of recycling is not the best thing we can do. And you know, clearly when we do it, we need to do it better. We need to do it right, and we need to do it better. Recycling actually sits in the middle of the waste hierarchy. This means that if you do decide to look for items that can be recycled, you might also consider how you can reduce the amount of waste you produce, the stuff that you buy, and reuse materials as much as possible before thinking about recycling. So you really want to kind of start at the top of this hierarchy. As you can see, recycling really sits in the middle. So let's go upstream a bit. Every time you buy, and every item you buy has an environmental impact. The majority of these impacts come before you even buy it, which are the steps circled in yellow in this graphic. all of which impact that product's environmental footprint. The solutions we need involve how we manage discards, but also what we buy, how we use stuff, how businesses design, make, and sell stuff. That's a lot harder to do, but if we want a healthy environment, we don't have any choice but to look at these bigger issues. Focusing on what you buy is more important than focusing on where it goes when you're done with it. By only thinking about an item's recyclability, we don't take into account the entire environmental impact. Let's dig a little deeper into this next example. Recycling is definitely good for the environment. So you might intuitively believe that more recycling is better for the environment. And in order to recycle more, we need a more recyclable waste stream. And so therefore, packaging that is easier to recycle will be better than packaging that is difficult to recycle. That assumption can be checked using an accounting tool called the life cycle assessment, or LCA. LCA quantifies the environmental impacts of a material across its full life. Here's one specific example from the DEQ that shows how recycling might not always be the best environmental choice. Here we see 3 types of coffee containers: a plastic pouch that is not recyclable, a plastic tub that is curbside that can be recycled in your curbside, the lid is trash, and a metal container that is recyclable curbside as well. Again, the lid is trash. We need to dig in more and look beyond recycling to see a true impact an item has on the environment. So the energy consumption required to manufacture the non-recyclable pouch is 4.5 times lower than the recyclable plastic tub and 4 times lower than the metal container. The non-recyclable pouch produces 4 times less CO2 than the plastic tub and 8 times less CO2 emissions than the recyclable metal container. And solid waste generation is also much lower for the non-recyclable pouch because it takes up much less space in the landfill. So while we're looking for products that are recyclable is generally good, there are also other things to consider. Here's that graphic of life cycle of materials again, shown with impacts correlated to material attributes. And what everybody wants by looking at these attributes is to reduce the negative impacts, shown on the left in red. We want materials that require less energy and less water, that reduce our contribution to global warming, human toxicity, and so forth. But most of us don't know how to evaluate these impacts in the materials we buy. So instead, we turn to easy to understand and popular attributes, such as the ones shown on the right in green. Is it compostable? Is it recyclable? Is it bio-based? And just about everyone assumes that these attributes are reasonable proxies for environmental goodness. Now, Kate has another poll featuring these attributes. So Kate, would you like to launch the poll?
Thanks, Jen. So you should see a new poll pop up on your screen. And the question is, what is your top priority when making business purchases? We'll give it a few more seconds here. All right, so I'm going to end the polling, share the results, and it looks like 48% chose affordability as the top priority when making business purchases. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Jen.
All right, thanks, Kate. So material attributes. How well and when do popular material attributes correlate with reduced environmental impacts, such as recycled content, bio-based content, or post-consumer content? How do they actually correlate with reductions in life cycle environmental impacts? Under what conditions are they helpful for informing environmental strategies, and under what conditions do they result in harmful or unintended outcomes? In this next example, we'll talk about one attribute that we emphasize as an option when looking at purchasing goods: post-consumer recycled content, or PCR. The DEQ found 20 studies that made a total of 534 comparisons between packages with higher levels of recycled content against packages containing lower levels of recycled content. Again, this is post-consumer recycled content, PCR. These studies made that type of comparison for a variety of packaging materials. And in total, almost all of those comparisons came to the same conclusion. Increasing recycled content of any given material reduces environmental impacts. This graph lists a bunch of different types of impacts: human toxicity, global warming, fossil fuel use, etc. All of the green here represents comparisons, the number of comparisons in the study, showing that more recycled content is a good thing. That is, it reduces impacts. In this chart, green is good, red is not. The red bars suggest that increasing recycled content actually worsens environmental conditions. But if you notice, there are very few of those red bars. So the evidence is clear from this study. Increasing recycled content is a good thing to do. That's an attribute you can use with confidence, unlike recyclability, which isn't always the best option when choosing materials or packaging. Now, sometimes businesses choose the material for their operations and manufacturing, like cardboard or glass. And then you have the option of increasing post-consumer recycled content of that material that you choose to purchase. For example, you could buy cardboard boxes for shipping products made from 10% PCR content or made from 50% PCR content. So again, the research shows that there's a good chance the item made with PCR, post-consumer recycled content, will cause less of an environmental impact. So I'm going to leave it on that note. I kind of breezed through a whole bunch of information. We've got a lot more content to come, but I will just want to wrap up our presentation with this quote from Rachel Carson, but also some key takeaways here. Just a little review. So materials upstream cause the most greenhouse gas emissions, and we cannot rely on recycling alone to stop climate change. It is important to focus on what you buy over where it goes when you're done with it. But when given the option, it is also important to recycle right, reduce contamination, and support the recycling markets of clean materials. And when it comes to material attributes, not all correlate with lower environmental impacts. Recycling will still remain a good choice, but recyclability is not always the best choice when purchasing products, and instead look for items with PCR content. There will be less environmental impact from these materials, and again, will support the recycled materials market. So thanks again for being here today, everybody. There's much more to come, and I'll now pass the mic over to Troy Gagliano from PGE. Troy, are you
Jennifer.
with us?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks.
So, I apologize for being video only. I'm at my current location. The bandwidth is a little lax, so I'm glad you can hear me okay. But
Yeah.
hi, everybody. I'm Troy Gagliano. I'm on the government affairs team for Portland General Electric, also a board member for the Hillsborough Chamber. So it's always delightful to be at these kinds of meetings. And thanks again, Deanna, for putting on a good one. I just take a couple seconds here to talk about some new corporate sustainability goals that we have, and then just kind of intro into our guests from DEQ. So just real quickly, last month in November, PGE announced new sustainability goals, and we're going to shoot for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And an interim goal of that would be by 2030, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% compared to 2010 amounts. So that aspirational goal of 100% greenhouse gas free by 2040 is pretty robust. And there's three things we're really going to do to get there. One, reducing emissions associated with the power that we serve to customers. Our number one clean energy, voluntary clean energy program, we've been number one for 12 years it is. So no surprise, our customers want us to keep driving to get cleaner and faster. Things we did like ending the coal plant operation at Boardman in October was a big step toward that. And then adding more renewable energy through wind and solar, and especially large scale battery storage, like our Wheat Ridge facility that's going up in Gillum County. That's 300 megawatts of new wind up and running, And then in 2021, we're going to add 50 megawatts of solar and 30 megawatts of battery storage. So that's going to be the biggest project of its type in the country. So that's very exciting. The second one is reducing emissions in our operations. Transportation still accounts for about 40% of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions. And one way we can contribute and make progress is through electrifying our fleet. And that's the whole suite of vehicles, sedans, SUVs, our small pickups, even forklifts by 2025. And then finally, the third way we'll do it is to continue providing customers different energy choices. Like I said, we've had the #1 voluntary renewable energy program for about 12 years, but we're also working hard at the Public Utility Commission and at the legislature, because cities and mayors and city councils keep saying, hey, that's great, but we want to see a new project. I want my money to go something new that I can point to. So we're building programs and establishing policies that allow those customers, whole municipalities and large industrial customers with very large loads, to participate in new renewable energy projects specifically that they can point to. So it's kind of new steel in the ground, and that's the evolution of customer demand for more green sources. So that's my simple story. So thanks for the chance to share that with you guys. If anybody has any information, I can certainly follow up, or you can get my information from Deanna. I'm happy to chat with anyone. So that takes us to our next presentation. We've got two guests from Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality. We're going to talk about the future of recycling in the state and potential upcoming legislation at the state level that'll seek to modernize and improve Oregon's recycling system. So with us today, we've got Sanne Stienstra and Brian Staffke. Both were former staff of Washington County's Green Business Leaders Program. And they're going to talk about some of the changes that may benefit and impact your business or organization. And then after that, they will have 15 minutes of Q&A after their slides. So please be sure to use the chat function for any questions during the presentation and for that Q&A portion to follow. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sanne and Brian. And thanks again for the opportunity, everyone.
Great, thanks, Troy. Appreciate you being here. Sanne and Brian, you guys around?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hey, yep, gotcha. Yeah.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
So you guys are going to take it away. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Sanne, do you see your screen share ready to go there?
Yes, here I go. How's that look? Can you see the slide, Brian?
Looks good to me.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Troy. As he said, I'm Sanne Stienstra. I work in Oregon DEQ's Materials Management Program. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces today. Thanks for having us here. I did used to work in Washington County's Green Business Leaders Program, so it's really fun to be back. Maybe I'll give Brian a second to introduce himself too.
Yeah, good morning, folks. This is Brian Staffke. I also worked with Washington County for about 3 years a while back. I didn't work with the green business folks. Justin Gast, my colleague, did, and I'm filling in for him today. I worked with the residential program.
Yeah. Thanks for having us again. So yeah, I will get into the presentation and we'll have plenty of time for questions. And if you put them in the chat, we can circle back to them at the end. We probably won't pause during the presentation, but feel free to put them in the chat and then we can come back to them. So in our presentation today, we're going to share a summary of the consensus recommendation of Oregon's Recycling Steering Committee, which we'll talk more about. But in just this past September, after 2.5 years of meetings, research, and outreach, this group of recycling system stakeholders found consensus on a comprehensive proposal to modernize Oregon's recycling system. So today we're going to recap that process for you, then talk about the content of the committee's consensus agreement and the subsequent legislative concept that will be introduced in the 2021 Oregon legislature, which begins in late January. And through the committee's work, its recommendation will require significant legislation to implement. So we'll end today with some next steps. So everyone here is most likely aware of the momentous impact that the international market disruptions, known as National Sword, had on the global recycling industry. These started just a couple years ago. And for Oregon, that event did more than just impact end markets for recyclables that were collected and processed in our system. It also shined a brighter light on issues Oregon has been dealing with for some time. So these issues include things like there's too much trash or contamination in what's being collected for recycling, product labels confuse the public, and there's a lack of effective feedback to people who are putting materials in their bins. They don't receive enough feedback on whether they're doing it right or wrong. Contamination, which is that trash or incorrect items in the bin, makes recycling more expensive. And current Oregon policy only requires recycling when it's cheaper than disposal. So we have kind of a policy misalignment. Volatility in recycling markets has led to higher rates for ratepayers, reduced service levels, or both in some communities around the state. So in the Portland metro area, you may have experienced higher rates on your garbage and recycling bill, maybe not reduced service levels, but that's something that's certainly happened in other parts of the state, and especially acute for small and rural communities and multifamily properties. There's also a lack of sorting and export standards for recycling processors, which has resulted in Oregon possibly shipping unwanted plastic and other garbage to communities that creates negative environmental and social impacts. And there are inequities in access to recycling service, conditions at processing facilities, particularly for those workers, and the distribution of burdens from pollution related to recycling. And all of this is diminishing public trust that materials are being responsibly recycled. And these are problems that we see and experience on the surface, but many of them are the consequences of some deeper challenges. So briefly, first, environmental benefits and economic signals aren't aligned. Recycling can reduce costs to society through reducing pollution and climate change, but these benefits are not reflected in the economic signals that private industry and local governments have to respond to. So this leads to an underinvestment in recycling activities. And second, Oregon's laws for recycling weren't designed to respond to today's challenges. 30 years ago, many things were different when these policy frameworks were created. Program economics were driven largely by newspaper recycling, and today newsprint is largely gone. Plastics are much more ubiquitous today, and 30 years ago, nobody anticipated that we would mix all our recyclables together in one or maybe two bins, or that we'd need processing facilities to sort all those things out from each other, or that we'd export materials to distant lands with less environmental regulation and infrastructure. And so lastly, there's a significant gap in responsibility involving consumer brands and manufacturers. These producers have the unique power to influence changes in packaging and product design, create market demand for recycled materials, and reduce price volatility, but they are largely absent from our current policy framework. So now Brian's going to tell you about the Recycling Steering Committee process and the work that was done to get us to a consensus proposal.
Thank you, Sanne. In response, DQ brought together stakeholders in early 2018 to brainstorm potential short-term changes to allow Oregon to weather the storm brought on by National Sword. However, not long into the process, stakeholders suggested a comprehensive, longer-term look at Oregon's policies. With that, the Oregon Recycling Steering Committee was born. The Recycling Steering Committee consists of 17 members representing every facet of our current industry: local governments, processing facilities, state governments, collection providers, and markets, etc. But the committee didn't include everyone, as producers, environmental groups, among others, did not have a seat at the table, though these entities would have opportunities to provide feedback at certain stages in the process. The group was facilitated by a program of Portland State University and operated according to a consensus model. DEQ participated in the committee as chair and member with one vote among many. We also provided significant staff support. Next slide, please. The RSC was guided by several things throughout its process. For starters, the committee operated in accordance to a charter that described the RSC's work, process, and purpose, which was to make recommendations to modernize the current system so that Oregon's future recycling system is one that played off these desired functions: equity, transparency and accountability, shared responsibility, the ability to collect clean materials, and reach responsible end markets, and more. Second, when considering a potential legal and relational framework of Oregon's future system, a framework being the laws, policies, agreements, and relationships to make up the standards, regulations, roles, and responsibilities associated with any given state recycling system, the RC made framework-related decisions in accordance to those functions that I mentioned. There were 16 of them total. They want to see the future desired system address all these functions. Lastly, the committee made system-related decisions that would set Oregon on a path to meet goals established within Oregon's 2050 vision, which is the state's plan for materials management. It was adopted by our Environmental Quality Commission in December 2012. The committee's deliberations were built on a foundation of extensive information gathering. DEQ provided significant support to the committee through research and information gathering. In this research, we looked at policies and legal frameworks used in other states and nations, identifying policy elements that might work in Oregon and combining them in several unique scenarios that were evaluated against the committee's desired outcomes. DEQ and the committee began some long overdue exploration of social equity considerations, considering the distribution of both benefits and burdens inside Oregon. Although only scratched the surface of this topic, it resulted in some meaningful elements in the consensus proposal. DEQ also engaged in extensive engagement with other interested parties. We hosted a large public workshop and followed up with a statewide survey. We met with representatives from more than 50 local governments across the state. We also commissioned target discussions with stakeholders that are typically underrepresented and underserved by the recycling system, including residents of apartments, people in rural communities, people of color, the houseless populations, and frontline workers in the facilities that sort our recyclables. Through these engagements, we discovered dissatisfaction with Oregon's existing ratepayer-funded recycling system and a strong interest in policy frameworks that would share responsibilities with producers. Finally, DEQ evaluated different infrastructure options for the state, considering different materials, collection modes, and processing systems. For each of those different options, we estimated the potential costs in terms of items such as labor, trucks, fuel, and freight. We also brought into this an evaluation of environmental impacts and their associated costs to society. This was groundbreaking work, and in a nutshell, it showed us that any of the infrastructure improvements studied compared to the existing baseline will cost more money, but the resulting benefits in terms of reduced costs of mortality, illness, climate change, and other impacts, while subject to some uncertainty, more often than not appear to justify those investments. At a certain point, more recycling or better recycling won't be worth it anymore, but we're not at that point yet. We're confident in this finding because we know we underestimated certain benefits. For example, our current recycling system likely results in some plastic waste leaking into rivers and oceans. Modernization could reduce that pollution, but we had no way to quantify it, so those benefits aren't included here. Now that we provided a high-level summary of the RSC process, let's dive into the consensus proposal that became Legislative Concept 578.
Great, thank you, Brian. So the concept establishes a significant overhaul of state policy in order to modernize Oregon's recycling system, in order to be resilient to change, optimize environmental benefits, and restore public trust. So central to this concept is what we call a shared responsibility model that assigns meaningful new responsibilities to the companies, which are largely global multinational companies that sell printed paper and packaging into Oregon. We talk about printed paper and packaging, it's the bulk of what makes up our recycling bins. And these responsibilities for those companies include financing many of the system improvements that are needed. And that's consistent with a global trend toward making producers responsible for what happens to the products and packaging they sell, which is known as extended producer responsibility. So currently, local governments are responsible for providing collection opportunities in their communities. And the legislative concept that we plan to introduce in January would maintain that role, and it adds new responsibilities to expand access to collection and improve the quality of what is collected. The processors that sort mixed recyclables will be subject to new requirements regarding sorting quality, social equity, and responsible recycling. Investments to improve collection and processing would be paid for by producers, and they would also be responsible for ensuring that materials properly collected are ultimately recycled in responsible ways. So there are multiple parties who are going to work toward making sure that our materials are recycled responsibly. A new advisory council made up of diverse stakeholders would advise on key elements of the system. And then the state, Oregon DEQ, our agency, would oversee the system. DEQ would continue to enforce recycling policies that local governments currently implement now. We would administer new permitting requirements on the processors, and we would regulate the producers in much the same way we currently do for our existing producer responsibility programs for electronics, paint, and waste medicines, which is a new program. And that's an overview of the concept, but before we walk through the concept and how it would change each stage of the recycling process, we want to first talk about some definitions. So right now, I just want to say this is a draft legislative concept, so the language is what's going to be introduced, but may change by amendment depending on the legislative process. So the first I want to talk about is who is considered a producer in this legislative concept. There's kind of three definitions, but the main one is here. So then we have some examples of who would be considered a producer. And so they're basically the companies that either manufacture or sell a product under their brand. So say the in-store Safeway brand of a product, the in-store Safeway pasta or tomato sauce. They're the owner of a license or a licensee of a trademark under which a covered product is sold. So maybe they didn't manufacture it themselves, but it's their brand. So say, for example, that could be Walmart. They sell a product that they didn't make it, but it's the Walmart brand on it. Some of this is a little bit in the nitty-gritty details, but it basically covers all of these different scenarios of who could be responsible, which company could be responsible along that supply chain. And then there's a few others. There's also definitions for large producers and small producers. Large producers may be required to do a bit more than others. That typically, in the concept, what that includes is primarily doing some kind of life cycle assessment, which I heard Jennifer talking about in the previous presentation. So that is part of the concept. And then small producers may be required to do a bit less or may be exempt from certain requirements. So what are covered products? We've been using that language, and I have a visitor, sorry, out my window. Covered products means packaging, for example, single-use bags, takeout containers, materials that hold products. printing, writing paper, and food serviceware, single-use food serviceware. This does not include beverage containers redeemed through the bottle bill system that you pay a deposit for. You get that deposit back of 10 cents, bound books, and then napkins or paper products used for cleaning or absorption of liquids. Okay, so now let's walk through some elements of the concept. I'm going to hand it back to Brian.
Thanks, Sanne. LC 578 begins by addressing the problem of misleading product labels. The concept would create new truth in labeling standards that would protect the public from misleading claims of recyclability. We'd also eliminate the current requirement on state law that all rigid plastic packaging be labeled with a recycling symbol, even if it can't be recycled. Currently, Oregon has a confusing patchwork quilt of different recycling lists and services from one community to the next. The proposal would create a uniform statewide list for curbside collection based on technical, economic, and environmental considerations. The list would be periodically reviewed and updated as conditions change. Producers would be obligated to develop education materials about that list that would be consistent and in a wide variety of languages to meet the needs of diverse populations. Local governments would be required to provide effective feedback to households and businesses that don't sort properly, and producers would be obligated to reimburse them for that effort. The consistent statewide list would lessen confusion about what is and is not acceptable curbside, and greater customer feedback would improve the quality of collected materials across the state. Additionally, the uniform statewide list would create more recycling opportunities around the state because many communities would be able to recycle more materials than they currently can. A new obligation on producers would also help expand collection services further to some communities that currently lack on-route or curbside recycling service, which includes smaller cities and unincorporated areas, and also to residents of multifamily housing that may currently lack equitable access. The concept would create a separate waste recovery goal for plastic packaging and result in more producer-funded or operated drop-off locations or mobile collection events. Drop-off recycling for multiple materials would also be expanded, especially in more remote communities where on-route collection isn't cost-effective. Almost all processing of mixed recyclables occurs at facilities in the Vancouver-Salem corridor. That makes recycling more expensive for communities elsewhere in the state who have to pay extra freight costs. The proposal would equalize costs by requiring producer funding of transport for more distant areas, which would support greater recycling opportunities in rural Oregon in particular. So by increasing access to collection service and using a consistent statewide list, the proposal aims to increase both the quantity of material recycled and address current inequities in service, especially for rural and multifamily residents. After collection, mixed materials are sent to one of several processing facilities to be sorted into commodity grades. These facilities operate in a very competitive environment and are currently only lightly regulated. LC 578 adds new standards to these facilities. Processors would be required to sort properly collected materials and send them to the correct market, and they'd be required to effectively remove contamination so that sorted material sent to markets have acceptably low levels of contamination. After processing, where the material ends up would also need to be more transparent, and the state would prohibit the transfer of materials to end markets, whether domestic or overseas, that cause environmental or social harm, for example, improper dumping of plastics in the environment. The concept would also seek to improve working conditions, wages and benefits for processing facility workers, and reduce negative impacts on surrounding communities. Producers would help make that financially possible. Most of Oregon's materials are sorted at facilities in state, but some materials are exported. So the proposal would require that local governments direct all collected materials to facilities that meet these new, stricter standards. Some of those standards could be met through new permitting requirements, while others could be met through certification. Processing facilities would have a new partner supporting the effort to achieve responsible recycling, that partner being the producers. The concept establishes that producers would be ultimately responsible for ensuring that if Oregon puts a material on our statewide collection list and that material is collected, it must actually get to a responsible end market for recycling and in a way that avoids negative impacts on ratepayers. This element has several benefits. Primarily, it provides a mechanism to ensure responsible recycling and restore public trust. It also brings stability to the system by protecting ratepayers and local governments from the volatility of global commodity markets.
Great, thanks, Brian. So there are a few other noteworthy elements in the legislative concept where it expands beyond recycling, because as Jennifer talked about, recycling is a good thing for the environment, but it's not the only thing we need to do. And it goes into considerations such as waste prevention and toxics reduction, and a few other things as well. This broader approach will be necessary to achieve Oregon's 2050 vision, which envisions a future where we produce and use materials responsibly. So one additional feature is the call for a continuous improvement model on advancing social equity. DEQ would periodically assess social equity considerations in the recycling system and report progress towards achieving standards. Also, like existing producer responsibility programs for electronics and paint in Oregon, individual producers would pay fees to a producer responsibility organization that would satisfy obligations on their behalf. So all the producers would get together and they'd have an organization that would help them meet all the requirements of the law. And each individual producer would pay fees to that group. So the producer would require those fees to be what's called eco-modulated or graduated, as they're known in the concept, which is structured in order to create incentives for environmentally beneficial design. And this would send price signals that reward lower impact packaging choices. For example, packaging that contains more recycled content, or where the producer discloses and reduces toxic constituents and impacts. The concept would also obligate producers to help fund programs that reduce and manage litter and local efforts to prevent waste at the source, such as supporting schools in transitioning from reusable dishware to single-use throwaways. That's the reduce, reuse part of reduce, reuse, recycle, and it's a higher priority in state law. And this additional funding could help Oregon have a much greater impact in preventing waste from being created in the first place. The legislative concept also will add to DEQ's regulatory and oversight roles in the recycling system. We would administer new requirements on local governments, the new permitting and certification framework for the processing facilities, and the full suite of requirements for a new producer responsibility program. And the concept also includes the formation of an external advisory council that would advise DEQ and the producer responsibility organizations on key program elements. So we see these as some of the ways in which the system will be coordinated. So as you can see, the consensus proposal from the Recycling Steering Committee, which is translated into that draft legislative concept, is broad and comprehensive. Importantly, it was the result of a consensus process, and it was negotiated to create a proposal that all members of the committee, which represents many parts of the recycling system, that they could support. So looking back at the root problems facing recycling, this concept addresses them all. And that's the reason DEQ is supporting it and moving forward with the draft legislation. So a new set of conversations is now underway, and we're resolving some details that the Recycling Steering Committee didn't have a chance to get to. We believe that this concept will be of significant benefit to the people of Oregon, and so we're working with folks to address these outstanding questions and concerns. Also, stakeholders who were not on the steering committee are now weighing in, and we're planning some additional meetings with interested parties that may or may not have been following the process along the way. And so we recently talked to local governments again to get their feedback, which we did before, to inform the process. And this feedback is really valuable and may inform one or more amendments to the bill. So that is the end of our presentation. And now we're happy to do some Q&A. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Sanne and Brian. Excuse me. So, excuse me again. I've got a couple questions in the chat. So I'll go ahead and kind of get rolling. We've got plenty of time here. So one question that came in, is there talk about moving away from single stream?
Bobby, do you want me to address that one?
Sure, go ahead.
So the way that materials are collected was studied as part of our process, and we did look at several scenarios where there would be a change in collection methods, typically referred to as dual stream. Folks know in Oregon that we collect glass separately, so you could think of that as second. So think of it as collecting containers separate from cardboard and fibers, that sort of thing, as dual stream. It was evaluated and discussed. There are pros and cons to the approach, and the committee members didn't really make a recommendation in this sense. Some folks were for it, some were against it. So it was something that we didn't include in the legislative concept at this time.
Thanks, Brian. I'll also add to that while it's not included in the legislative concept, communities can, that's a local decision, basically. Local governments, by maintaining local control of collection, that's something local governments can now and likely into the future, based on how the LC is currently written, could choose to do if they wanted to.
Yeah, and I should note too that there are some communities in Oregon that never did go to a full commingled system. And we're also seeing communities around the nation who are moving from a commingled back to more of a separated system.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question here. LCAs are often expensive, complex, and the results and findings can be limited based on inputs or skewed because of corporate interests. If an LCA is required for large generators, will the DEQ assist financially and with the expertise to ensure valid LCAs?
Good question. There's a few parts to this. So just want to first address that the LCAs would be required of large producers. So not sure if that changes your understanding of the question, Aaron, but large producers who put a lot of material into the system. And so yes, DEQ would assist with expertise and setting requirements or a process for how an LCA could be done or should be done. And DEQ would also review that LCA. So in terms of the expertise and, the interest in what the results might say, yes, DEQ would be involved with that. Financially, no, the large producers would pay for that themselves.
All right. So this next question that came through, does that apply to producers selling into Oregon, not necessarily located here?
Right, exactly. So the requirement, the definition of producer and who would be regulated in this system is any company selling, distributing, or placing a product into Oregon. So it's a level playing field between companies inside and outside of the state. And if there's a large producer in Oregon, it would apply to them, but also anyone outside of Oregon as well who does business in the state.
And I sort of have another question that will sort of dovetail that. So what does this mean for the consumer? Paying more as they pass down is this a pass down for the consumer costs? How, what happens in that process?
Yeah, good question, Jennifer. So the intention is to internalize costs that are currently externalized and being paid for by the ratepayer and by the environment right now. So in a sense, yes, the new costs that producers would pay to ensure responsible end markets, living wages for workers, expanding collection, things like that, would be embedded in the price of the product. But because there's some disagreement about this in the literature and the discussion on this, but DEQ's position is that because these are mainly large multinational corporations, that price that's embedded in the product isn't going to be felt strongly by the consumer when they buy that product. And DEQ did commission some research as part of this project that compared systems in different Canadian provinces where they have had extended producer responsibility systems for decades. And the researchers compared the price of the same products in a province with EPR and a province without it, and there was no noticeable price difference. So they could not find evidence of the province having higher prices because they had an EPR system in place. So as I said, there's a lot of discussion about this topic, and we don't have US examples right now to compare it to, but that's currently DEQ's position and understanding of that question.
And so are there other states doing anything similar to this that the DEQ has pulled information from?
Yeah, so there aren't any US states that have passed producer responsibility for printed paper and packaging, but the US is increasingly an outlier in this generally. So there are many states, well, I should say maybe several states working towards this. So Maine and California have already had bills and attempted to pass it. They haven't been successful yet. California is trying again. Washington State, New York, and several other states are also in discussions and have active legislation or planned draft legislation as we do. So, and we've been in touch and talking with these other states as well. Brian, do you want to talk about the coordination with California and Washington for a bit?
Sure, and maybe I'll briefly touch on that, what you said about other nations and the cost impacts. You know, it's kind of assumed that large global corporations which are producing products on a global scale are likely already including these costs for these producer responsibility programs in other nations. It's relatively common in Canada and Europe to have these. So to some degree, you could say you're already paying for those programs. And also the benefits of recycling are a global benefit. So we're also thinking that it's uncommon for global pricing to be reflected locally. In terms of coordination, we meet regularly with folks both from California and Washington State to share information. We've been doing that for several years now. We've learned a lot from each other. And we're hoping as much as possible our approaches can be coordinated in the end.
Although I will add to that, that Oregon's proposal is a bit different than what we have seen come out of the other states in their proposals so far. Oregon's is the only shared responsibility model, and the other proposals in the other states are focusing on, are including what's considered more of a full producer responsibility model, where producers would pay for all the costs of the system, and you would lose that, not lose per se, but producers would have more control. Local governments wouldn't have local control, and the processing facilities would no longer compete with one another or operate in that competitive environment. So Oregon's approach is a bit different, but because none of them have been successful in passing or becoming law yet, there's still opportunity for any of them to end up being coordinated with one another.
Yeah, and to that point, many other states are looking to Oregon as a leader in this area, and our model might be the model that is most successful, but we have yet to see.
We're hopeful.
Yeah. So on that tip, we had a question come in. What are you both and other folks there at the DEQ most excited about with this legislation, based on working in the industry now for so long?
Good question. Brian, do you have a response top of mind?
Yeah, I think that many and all of the improvements we're making are pretty significant. Our system was established 35 some odd years ago and hasn't really changed since then. And back then, like was alluded to in the presentation, we didn't anticipate this commingling and mixing of materials. So the environmental benefits of this modernization could be significant, and the equity considerations are really important. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcomes here next year.
Yeah, I would echo what Brian said, and along with that as well, I think the opportunity to incorporate full life cycle thinking and these non-directly recycling related elements into a producer responsibility program is innovative and not, there are some European countries that have some incentives for things like toxics reduction, but it's another area in which Oregon is kind of pushing ahead, and I'm really excited and hopeful that if Oregon's proposal is successful, that we can be a model for other states and start moving the conversation on waste prevention and full life cycle thinking to other states and around the country in a major way. So yeah, thanks for that good question.
Yeah, that was from Kate. I had some of our staff coming in with some questions as well. So, and there was one add-on that was asking about any changes in composting requirements or standards.
Brian, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So the scope of the recycling steering committee was primarily recycling, and primarily those that are collected en route and at depots as part of our Opportunity Recycling Act requirements. So composting really wasn't in scope to begin with. However, we do have this truth in labeling provision that applies to recycle, or would apply to recycling, and we're looking at that closely to see about how that may apply to composting. Cover products do include what some would call compostable items, such as cups and plates and forks and that sort of thing that are certified under third-party standards. So those materials would be covered, and to some degree they might be considered contamination in certain areas. Our composters in Oregon currently have a food waste only approach. Those products that are put on the market are problematic in the real world on a field condition. We are engaging in conversations with the compost industry. We've already had one meeting. We're planning another one next week to see, are there opportunities for some additional language in an amendment that would further protect composters and bolster their ability to manage properly any materials that do end up in compost. So we don't have a proposal just yet on that along those lines, and the Recycling Steering Committee didn't really address it yet.
Yeah, I would I guess I would kind of comment on that too. If any folks here on the meeting today, especially our business community, would like to know more about composting in Oregon, we have some information we can share, and certainly Brian and Sanne, we have heard as the DEQ knows that compostable serviceware is, as you said, certainly a contaminant, but it has been, the studies have shown that it is both a contaminant in the well, not a contaminant in the landfill, but it has environmental impacts when it's in the landfill, because it also affects, atmospherically. It doesn't do any good whether it's in the landfill or in an industrial compost situation. So, just really trying to dispel the myth about compostables. So again, if any businesses that are in the meeting today want to contact the Green Business Leaders Program, we have a lot more information we can share about that. And please feel free to add to that. I've opened up we've gone in a different direction here, but it's always a good conversation,
Yeah, definitely. Jennifer, I had somebody send me a question.
Oh yeah, go for it.
That I could answer.
Absolutely.
Cool. So
please.
someone asked, do smaller curbside garbage containers contribute to increased recycling contamination? So, that's not necessarily something that we looked at, although I'll check with Brian because he's more familiar with the research on the infrastructure options. I think, the convention is that right sizing containers is important. I think especially something that we understand is for multifamily properties, that right sized containers for your level of garbage compared to recycling is important for preventing contamination. It can also have consequences for recyclables ending up in the garbage depending on the situation. So I don't think this is something that the steering committee talked about much, or that's reflected in the consensus agreement or the accompanying legislative concept, but I'll stop talking and see if Brian has anything to add on that.
Sure. So we did a fair amount of research around various ways to reduce contamination. We asked our contractor to do a literature review of what was out there. This question of garbage relative to recycling isn't something that has been well studied. And where it was studied, there's not really clear information about the impacts it might have on contamination. So that's still kind of an open question. Does the frequency of collection, the size of garbage, et cetera, those questions are still relatively unanswered.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, that is a great question. Well, unless either Sanne or Brian, unless you both have received questions directly, we do not have any more questions in the chat. Let's see, just picking any other spots here. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up here. Unless you all, Brian or Sanne, would like to share anything else, any additional upcoming kind of information, or, obviously over the next 6 months, there's going to be a lot of legislative activity.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I'm going to put in the chat the link again to our website. There's lots of great resources there. There's a fact sheet, a 12-minute summary video if you want to share with anyone else. There's also a link to sign up for our email list. And so if you're interested in getting alerted when there's a public meeting or opportunity for feedback, please sign up for that. And there's also contact information if you are interested in talking more with the EQ and sharing your feedback or your thoughts, support, questions, or anything about the legislative concept. We're wanting to talk with members of the business community and anyone else interested in the legislative concept. So thank you very much for your attention and your good questions. And please do be in touch if you're interested.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Sanne. That's great. Yeah, and to our business folks here, we'll definitely keep you in the loop on upcoming opportunities via our e-newsletter. So keep an eye out for that. And if any of you aren't signed up for the e-newsletter, there will be a little bit more information coming up in the chat links that will have a direct link to signing up for the e-newsletter. So that comes out every other month, and it's just a pretty quick breeze through, touches on some good information for the business community to kind of keep the pulse on. So, so I want to say a huge thank you, Sanne and Brian and DQ, for just the tremendous amount of work that you're doing. It's really fascinating. I know it's been a long haul, and so I'm very excited to see what the future holds. And just Oregon is again doing a heck of a lot of groundbreaking work. So it's very exciting. So
thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And feel free to stay on if you guys would like to, but we are ahead of time. We've got about 10 minutes here before Kate will take the mic and share some more information about the Green Business Leaders Program. But so Deanna, would you like to come on and just share any information about what the chamber's up to these days, and just have a quick chat, and maybe we'll wrap up here in about, give you about 5 minutes, and then we'll switch it over to Kate and keep trucking along here. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you to Sanne and Brian. Nice to see you, Sanne. So I really appreciate that information. Obviously, really important to the business community to follow and track this legislation and participate in the process. So thank you very much. I know as we move forward into the legislative session, that the chamber will have opportunities to connect and provide additional information to our business community and allow them an opportunity to have a voice to that process. Obviously, the chamber's been really engaged with our business community during the COVID pandemic, and we have been helping our small businesses, providing them information about guidance, assistance, support, grant programs that are desperately needed for small businesses that are now finding further restrictions happening. We absolutely, want to make sure that they're able to keep their employees safe as well as their customers and operate in a safe environment. With that, we do have a free PPE program for small businesses, and we would welcome if you know anybody that could utilize that. The businessrecoveries.org website is a great place to go. You can apply for a free PPE. So any of our personal services, restaurants, folks that are having to purchase large amounts and quantities of PPE and maybe finding that it's more difficult to locate that, or they're paying a premium, please direct them to the Hillsborough Business Recovery Center. There are actually 4 in Washington County. There is a program of Washington County's CARES Act funding program. There's one in Hillsborough, there's one in Forest Grove, at Adelante Mujeres, one in Tualatin, and one in Beaverton. So at the Beaverton Chamber. So definitely point folks to that location. Really important for them to have the supplies that they need without having to dip into very limited cash reserves right now. A couple of different grant programs that are moving forward right now. The City of Hillsborough has a grant program. Washington County has a grant program in unincorporated area. There are 6,600 and some odd businesses located in Washington County's unincorporated area. So, and they don't necessarily have a chamber located in their community. And so making sure that we reach out to those businesses and that they know that they have support and resources available at the 4 business recovery centers, really important. Really appreciate Washington County's leadership in receiving direct funding from the CARES Act and distributing that in a meaningful way to all of our small business community. It's very, very useful. We're waiting for the next announcement about additional federal funding. I know our small businesses are anxiously awaiting any sort of information that they might be able to receive. We do have a program coming up next Thursday morning at 8 o'clock featuring Marnie Kyle. I don't know if I have her last name correct. She is the Director of Washington County Health and Human Services. She'll be talking about the vaccination distribution, and we know that that's going to be important for businesses. Businesses love certainty, and there's been no certainty at all during this pandemic. So if we can help them by giving them a little bit of information about what that might look like, what the strategy is, just it helps them in forecasting their future. So I think that's all I have, Jennifer, at this point, and happy to answer any questions if anybody has any questions regarding the business recovery centers or how small businesses can access those resources. Please just let me know.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. Yeah, that's really valuable information. And yes, Marty Kyle, the Health and Human Services Department of Washington County has been just working just incredibly hard since, day one, which obviously back in March 10th or whatever, I spent a little time working in the Emergency Operations Center. And so, yep, lots of pivoting. So thanks again, Deanna. That was a great update. And yeah, folks, please do reach out to Deanna at the Hillsborough Chamber if you have any questions or would like to connect about accessing some of those resources. So, okay, well, it's 10 o'clock, just about, and we've got about a half an hour left. I think we're probably going to wrap up a little early today, but I would like to pass the mic, as we say in the biz, and the screen over to my colleague, Kate DeCesare. She is Washington County's Green Business Leaders, Green Business Advisor. And so she's going to just share some program highlights about the Green Business Leaders program. And then we're going to also have a little bit more interaction with everybody on the meeting today. We've got a moment to just kind of connect with a smaller group. And so Kate, if you are ready to take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, Jennifer. And I just want to confirm, can you see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
All right, awesome. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm Kate DeCesare. I am a Green Business Advisor, and now I'm going to talk about what our Green Business Leaders team has been up to this year and what we have planned for next year. So despite some restrictions on in-person meetings, we're still providing our core services to businesses in Washington County, though a couple things have changed. So we're doing contactless resource deliveries, and we can provide free internal recycling and food scraps collection bins. We're also offering free posters, decals, and other resources to help your business recycle right. And there are examples on your screen, so please reach out if your business needs any resources. We're also offering technical assistance virtually instead of in person, and we can help make changes to your waste collection service, like adding food scraps bin or decreasing the service levels at your workplace if everybody's working remotely. We can also host virtual presentations and trainings for your staff, and we're developing new ways to connect with you virtually, like public webinars and videos. So for example, we're going to be joining our community outreach team to host 2 holiday recycling fair webinars on December 17th, and you can find more info about that on our Facebook page. So many of you have probably heard about our Green Business Award already, but I'll share some basics in case this is new info. So any business located in Washington County, except in the city of Beaverton, can apply. And there are 2 award levels. The Silver Award is for businesses that complete between 30 and 39 practices. The Gold Award is for businesses that complete 40 or more practices. And the award lasts for 3 years, and businesses meet annually with the Green Business Advisor to stay on track of goals, address new challenges, and to share green business best practices. The award itself is made using recycled bike parts by a company called Resource Revival that's located in Mosier, Oregon. So recently we've made updates to the application, and we're excited to share that with our business community. The practices are broken into categories that you see on your screen, and we have 2 applications, one for business retail and the other for food sector. Each application has about 70 total practices that fall within these categories, and our team has spent the last 5 months or so making updates to just about every category. We've done research, had many internal discussions, gathered input on certain topics from outside our team, and ultimately made updates to all categories. Our goal was to include a more intentional focus on equity, accessibility, and to clarify some practices that we often get questions about. The updated applications, both the Spanish and English versions, are now live on our websites. But if you've already started on the original application, we'll still accept it, but we do encourage you to review the new applications because there might be new practices on there that you can include. And for now, we're going to verify the applications virtually. And then we're also working on something new for folks working from home. So make sure you sign up for a newsletter and keep an eye out for that next year. We've also started creating videos to answer some common recycling questions and provide more detail about the practices on our Green Business Award application. We have a series called Trash Talk Tuesday that has videos shared on Tuesday on our Facebook page. And we're working with the county to set up our own YouTube channel that will post all of our videos and our recorded webinars too, and basically create a library of resources. And we're also interested in spotlighting our green businesses in some videos, and we'd love to connect with any of you who could be interested in sharing about your green business practices. So we thought if that sounds interesting to you. And as I mentioned earlier, our team has been thinking of new ways of connecting with our business community. And so one of those is a virtual coffee hour series that will launch next year. So we're going to be hosting 45-minute coffee hour chats and bring in industry experts to talk about green business topics like energy and water audits, electric vehicles, zero waste, recycling special items, and more. So we're going to be promoting this primarily through our Green Business Bulletin newsletters, so be sure to sign up for it now if you haven't already. And now, in an effort to replicate some of the peer-to-peer networking and conversations that happen at in-person events, we're going to use breakout rooms to have some small group discussions. So you'll be assigned to a breakout room shortly, and there will be a Spanish-speaking room and multiple English rooms. Each room is going to have a Washington County team member in there just to help facilitate or answer any questions. And we're suggesting that you start with the questions that are on your screen here, but of course, let the conversation happen organically. But really just consider this as an opportunity to offer and receive support or feedback on your current project or challenges. So once you get in the room, please be prepared to use your mic or the chat function to have a discussion. And if you need help, you can press the help button or just let your facilitator know. And with that, I'm going to assign everybody into breakout rooms. And we'll be in these rooms for 10 minutes before we come back to the main room. Thanks, everybody. I'll give folks just a minute to come back. And so now I'd like to...
Sorry, that was a great discussion. I really appreciated folks having a moment to kind of share. Seems like that 10 minutes went by really fast.
It really did.
Go ahead, Kate.
No, great. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of circle back and ask each of the facilitators here just to kind of share in the chat maybe some main themes or some of the things that you all talked about in your breakout rooms. And I can go ahead and start here. Just want to make sure I have the correct screen shared. Okay, perfect. So we talked about all the topics, and I'd say the top sources of waste, PPE, paper waste, and then single-use plastics, which I know I've heard from a couple folks here. And then some challenges. COVID caused just many things to go on hold. Some people reported that they lost traction due to virtual working. And then there's kind of a lot of concern about when we come back, people are going to need to relearn some habits. And then some successes, we had 2 people in our room who recertified their Green Business Award virtually this year. So that was great that they were willing to kind of go through the process with us and learn how to do it together. Now I'm going to open up the chat here and I can see some folks have added stuff. So in Heather's room, there were 2 topics that stood out: the increased use of single-use products and PPE, and then also educating on how to dispose of or recycle PPE, single-use items, and just to work on general education and outreach when in person. So hopefully we'll be in person again and we can do all of that. I know some PPE manufacturers are taking back items. So like Kimberly-Clark in particular, they have take-back programs for gloves. And so I'd encourage you to check that out with your manufacturer as well. And then Jen, Maysel, or Ricardo, were there any themes or takeaways in your rooms that you wanted to share? Oh, and
Yeah, I've got, since I've got my mic on, I'll pop in here real quick. So biggest themes were onboarding and training new staff around sustainability culture. And just how important that is to really take that time to train staff, not only obviously on just their day-to-day tasks, but and what their responsibilities are, but building that into the training, and that's something that we really emphasize too on our certification with the Green Business Leader certification is you know, getting folks at the very beginning, especially because everyone coming into a business has a range of knowledge levels. So, and if your culture is really strong on sustainability, then you probably will likely already have that built in. And then the other one was just really difficult materials, like byproducts from manufacturing. So, you know, whatever materials are generated, and just trying to find processors that will either recycle them or dispose of them properly. So big challenges there. Yep.
Awesome, thanks, Jen. And Ricardo shared from his room some of the successes they talked about would be the resiliency of people in adverse situations. And then also some other challenges, maybe reevaluating some professional services in the post-COVID world and their delivery. You know, will we go back to in-person situations, or will we continue the remote meetings and that sort of thing? Anything to add, Ricardo?
Yes, if I may, one of the things that we discussed in this room was also the, you know, technology along with the circumstances made it for us to realize there are fewer needs for example, for printing documents. In this case, you know, the advances that PDFs have, where you can actually sign and is recognized legally as such, that is also something that can be adapted to less printing. So we know that for some of us, it is still having a printed form is necessary, but it has become that we need much fewer than we did before. And so we are adapting, and technology is adapting rapidly as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ricardo.
Yeah, those are great points, Ricardo.
Definitely. And while I do hope we get to a more normal situation, I hope we can keep some of these things that we've learned and some things that tend to be working really well. All right. Anybody have anything else to add?
Yeah, I can add ours. So I kind of lost track of time, but one of the topics that we talked about the most, because everybody was really working from home, the first question, the answer was, what's your biggest sustainability challenge at the moment? And it was about nursery pots and nursery pot trays. Mm-hmm. And figuring out a way to dispose of them in a more sustainable manner instead of just bringing them to the landfill. So we had a question about where we can take large amounts of nursery pots and trays, especially because we know not all of them are number 6s. But yeah, so Kate and Jennifer, if you have any resources to give, and or if you know for sure that Agilix will take all types of nursery pots and trays, or Pride Recycling Depot. And also the second question, do you have a project that you need input on? It was mostly about the pots and trays. And then and also somebody else working from home, and they have a green team, but maybe for all of us that are working from home, if we can have some ideas on how to engage our green team in ways, because I know, Kate, you had brought up how your Green Business Award is going to be looking more at sustainable things to do at your home office. So we could have some ideas about that.
Yeah, thanks, Maysel. And I'm actually working on a presentation that I'm delivering to a business tomorrow, kind of about that topic. So about working from home and some actions like that. So if that sounds like something that any of your coworkers could benefit from, definitely let us know, and we can certainly schedule something. regarding the nursery pots question, I guess one idea that popped into mind at first would be to check with the nursery if they could potentially reuse those, if you could donate them back. And then I would actually ask Heather if she has any insight into that recycling question.
Oh, sorry, Kay, I think you cut out a little bit, but I'm guessing it was a question about nursery pots. Yeah, basically the rigid pots, you know, was it 4 inches or larger than 4 inches? Those are acceptable in the mixed recycling, just like I said, and some drop-off depots, and then Agilux will take the crinkly kinds because those are the number 6, but they won't take the kind of more rigid, the kind of pots that kind of feel more like a butter tub. You know, it's hard to describe how a material feels, but there's the crinkly and then there's the more rigid and not so crinkly. So the crinkly tends to be number 6, and that's what Agilux is looking for number 6 for their drop-off location.
Yeah, and I
Even
would
the
say
trays.
definitely if it's got the number 6 on it, that would be your best bet to follow for Agilux, certainly. And then, yeah, anything 4 inches or larger. And, you know, again, our What to Recycleware tool at Washington County is a good place to go. You can enter in all kinds of questions about materials that you have and be directed to several different options. So, Kate.
Can I add on to that, Jennifer? So the question was more from a business standpoint. So they have all the plants, pots, nursery pots, and they take large amounts to the landfill all the time, and they'd like to know if there is another resource that they can go to take those pots, since they can't put them in the mixed recycling bin. And they generally have the large rigid pots and trays.
Well, I mean, I liked Kate's idea of seeing if I mean, I don't know if that's you know, if they're shipped from far away, but yeah, I guess I'm you know, many of them should be able to go into a commercial mixed recycling collection. So unless I'm not understanding you know, if there's a variety, then that might be challenging because you'd have to, you know, filter through the sizes and pluck out the ones that can't be recycled. So I guess if I'm answering that, I don't know, Heather, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I'd actually even right now, since we have the business here, if I would get a one-on-one with your green business advisor and actually go through the types of containers that you have, the trays, the pots, and then get just like a very specific customized sort of instruction on what, you know, applies to your particular type of a nursery. So that would be my recommendation, just so that there's no confusion. Again, trying to describe material over the, you know, over a Zoom call.
Yeah.
And we will be dropping our information on the chat, right? As well.
Sure. Yeah. We can
Our
certainly
contact information.
Yep, we can certainly do that. And now, just in the interest of time, I wanted to thank you all for having these discussions today and for participating. I really like that we got to bring that into this meeting, and just also remind you that you're awesome and you can make a difference. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jamie from Epson.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jamie from Epson, and also represented here by Doris Gonzalez. She's on this call as well. And you know, we do participate in the Green Business Program. We are a certified gold site, and you know, our participation in that program we feel is, you know, is very helpful and important for us. You know, as mentioned here today, the importance of life cycle thinking, and that is something that we endeavor to do every day. And we understand, you know, that you know, businesses, you know, if they're not solving societal problems like that, really are not going to be around for the long haul. And that's kind of our philosophy. And I think probably, you know, companies that participate in these programs feel the same way. you know, the program also is it's also a good test, or provides a good framework, and can give you ideas and how to improve your reuse, recycling, or reduction in use of consumables. And you know, it not only helps influence companies, but it also, you know, influences individuals. You know, so I know just participating in these types of events influences me personally. I just know from, I think it was last year, some people may or may not remember, we talked about single-use straws and single-use cups. And I happened to walk in with a big gulp cup. And, you know, walking away from that, I changed my own personal behavior, and I bought a reusable cup, you know. And so, you know, I do see that influencing, you know, people at work too, you know. So it's not only important for us as businesses to do that, but also as individuals, and it helps that. But I'd also like to thank everyone who contributed today. And, you know, we are always happy to help sponsor this, and along with the chamber. And, you know, if it's important in Hillsborough and it's important to businesses, you know, Deanna and the chamber are always involved. You know, and of course, you know, the Green Business Leaders Program and everyone at Washington County, thanks a lot. It's a great program, and keep up the good work. And then also like to thank the other sponsors, PGE and the Port of Portland. You know, thank you very much there. And then, you know, just like to thank everyone for attending. And there are more virtual events that were mentioned coming up next year, and we look forward to, you know, participating in those. And I think it'll be some good opportunities, especially in this time, you know, during the pandemic. It's difficult for everyone. And I'd just like to, you know, wrap it up by saying thanks, and have a great day, and stay safe. It's a tough time.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And
Yeah.
yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here, and to all the sponsors and folks involved. So yeah, everybody have a great day and great rest of your week. And we've got a weekend coming up. I'm really looking forward to it. So
Jennifer, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
I think there was a question about whether or not the slides from DEQ and other presentations would be made available. Is that something we can forward and send out to our attendees?
Yes, we have the slides. Yep, we have slides from both, and we will be actually following with an evaluation. And so I will share with you, Deanna, with our participants. We also have a registrant list, so we can kind of coordinate that and make sure that everybody gets the information from both the chamber and from Green Business Leaders Program, and you know, get everybody connected. So yeah, absolutely.
And we have recorded the program today, so if someone you know would be interested in this information, just know that I'm sure Washington County will have it on their YouTube channel. We'll have it on ours as well. So thank you all for participating. Truly, truly appreciate it. Thanks for all your hard work.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Gracias a todos.